The chilly wind biting through his tuxedo was the first reminder that his usual world of climate-controlled offices and chauffeured cars was far away. Elias Vance, a man whose name was synonymous with groundbreaking tech startups and a net worth that featured comfortably on top 30 under 30 lists, had just spent 3 hours at a Chicago charity gala. He had smiled, shaken hands, and pledged a sum that would barely dent his fortune, all while feeling the familiar hollow echo that these events often left inside him. It was performative philanthropy, and he was its star performer. His driver, Charles, had just pulled the sleek black car to the curb, a sanctuary of heated leather and silence waiting to swallow him whole. But as Elias reached for the door handle, his eyes caught on a small, static shape against the flow of bustling, well-dressed attendees. It was a child, a girl, curled into herself on the cold concrete. She was a stark anomaly amidst the glittering crowd, a splash of grim reality against a backdrop of curated wealth. People streamed past her, their glances fleeting, tinged with a mix of pity and discomfort, but no one stopped. Elias was a man who dealt in data, in patterns and anomalies, and this was a profound anomaly he couldn't ignore. He found his feet moving toward her before his mind had fully processed the decision. As he drew closer, the details sharpened, each one a small, sharp needle of reality. She was painfully thin, her coat too large and visibly threadbare. Her hair, a tangled mop of brown, did little to hide the exhaustion on her face, a look that no child should ever possess. Clutched in her small reddened hands was a piece of torn cardboard, the message scrawled in a shaky juvenile hand with a marker that was running out of ink. The words, however, were what truly arrested him. They were not the standard plea for help or food. They were specific, strange, and heartbreakingly earnest. "Please let me work for my mom. She is sick." The capital W in work stood out, a formality borrowed from an adult world she was too young to understand. This wasn't just a request for charity, it was a job application from a 7-year-old. The phrasing echoed in his mind. She wasn't asking for a handout for herself, she was offering her labor, her childhood, in exchange for help for her mother. The transactional nature of it, so stark and innocent, cut through the usual cynical defenses Elias carried. He crouched down, his expensive shoes touching the grimy pavement, bringing his eyes level with hers. Her name, she whispered, was Lily. She didn't cry or beg, simply stated her case with a weary gravity that was far beyond her years. She explained that her mother, Anya, was too sick to leave their apartment, that she couldn't work, and that they had no one else. In that moment, Elias Vance, the millionaire who solved complex algorithmic problems for fun, was faced with a human equation he didn't know how to solve. He knew that giving her cash and walking away was the easy, the expected thing to do. But the anomaly was too great, the puzzle too unsettling. He made a quiet, firm decision. He told Charles to cancel the rest of his evening. He was not going to his penthouse. He was going to ensure this little girl, Lily, got home safely. It was a small first step, but one that would unknowingly set him on a collision course with a darkness he could never have imagined. The drive to Lily's home was a silent journey through a Chicago Elias rarely saw. The glittering skyline of the Loop gave way to neighborhoods where the streetlights flickered with a tired orange glow and the buildings wore their age like a heavy coat. Lily sat beside him, a small island of quiet in the vast car, her eyes fixed on the world outside the window as if navigating by a hidden map. She finally pointed towards a narrow, dimly lit street, indicating a brick building that seemed to sag under its own weight. The air in the hallway was thick with the smell of old cooking and dampness. Elias followed her up several flights of stairs, each step creaking a protest. Lily unlocked a door, revealing a small, cluttered apartment that felt both stifling and cold. The scene inside was a paradox that immediately pricked at Elias's analytical mind. The place was messy, with piles of clothes and unwashed dishes, yet nestled amongst the chaos were items that didn't belong. A gleaming, expensive-looking air purifier hummed quietly in a corner, its digital display a stark contrast to the peeling wallpaper. On a small table next to a worn-out sofa stood a collection of amber prescription bottles. They were all empty, but their labels were professionally printed, bearing the name Anya Petrova and the name of a drug, clonazepam, that a quick mental search told Elias was for anxiety. In a sunken armchair wrapped in a thin blanket was Anya. She was pale and fragile, her breathing a shallow, raspy sound. Her eyes, the same shade as Lily's, held a deep, weary confusion as she looked at the stranger her daughter had brought home. Elias introduced himself as calmly as he could, explaining he had found Lily and wanted to ensure they were both safe. Anya's voice was a weak thread of sound. She thanked him, her words slurred and distant. She explained she had been unwell for a long time, a mysterious fatigue and nausea that left her bedridden. She mentioned a friend, a man named Damien, who helped them. He brought the medicines, the purifier, and paid the rent in cash. She said his name with a kind of helpless gratitude. But as Elias looked around, the pieces refused to fit. The squalor of the apartment clashed violently with the high-cost medical items. Anya's symptoms were severe, yet she claimed multiple doctors could find no cause. And the presence of this Damien, a benefactor who operated strictly in cash, sent a cold trickle of suspicion down Elias's spine. This was not a simple story of poverty and illness. It felt like a performance, a carefully staged scene of desperation, but for whose benefit? Leaving the apartment with a promise to check in tomorrow, Elias felt a conviction solidify within him. He needed to look past the surface misery. He needed to find the hidden design, the architect of this peculiar suffering. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the contact of a discreet private investigator he had used for corporate matters. The anomaly of Lily's sign had now blossomed into a full-blown mystery. The private investigator, a woman named Rosa, was a stark contrast to the corporate spies Elias usually employed. She was quiet, observant, and moved through the city's underbelly with an effortless anonymity. Her initial report on Anya Petrova was deeply unsettling in its emptiness. Anya had no digital footprint to speak of, no social media, no employment history for the past 5 years. She and Lily had materialized in Chicago 2 years ago, their trail before that vanishing in a small, depressed town in Ohio. There was no record of extended family, no friends sending letters or making calls. It was as if they had been deliberately erased. The most significant finding, however, was the shadow that began to take shape in the periphery of their lives. Rosa's surveillance photos revealed a man. He was of average height and build, with a forgettable face, always dressed in dark, nondescript clothing. This was Damien Croft. He appeared at the apartment building every Tuesday and Friday like clockwork, never staying for more than 20 minutes. He never arrived with visible groceries or supplies, only a small, black duffel bag. He was careful, often pausing to scan the street before slipping inside. Rosa dug into Damien's past, uncovering a history of small-time grifts and con artistry. He had been charged, but never convicted, in several schemes targeting elderly and vulnerable individuals, usually involving fake home repairs or fraudulent investment opportunities. He was a ghost who preyed on other ghosts, on people who wouldn't be missed. The connection was there, but the motive was still shrouded in fog. Why was he investing time and what appeared to be significant money, the air purifier, the prescriptions, into a sick woman and her child? He wasn't a relative. He wasn't a romantic partner, as Rosa's observations confirmed. Anya was almost always bedridden and there was no intimacy in his visits. He was a caretaker, but one with a criminal record for exploitation. The pieces were a horrifying contradiction. Elias spent long hours staring at the grainy photo of Damien, trying to decipher the man's game. This wasn't a smash-and-grab robbery, it was a long, slow, meticulous operation. Damien was cultivating their suffering, not ending it. He was maintaining Anya's illness, not curing it. The empty prescription bottles were a testament not to a failed treatment, but to a sustained one. The purpose of Lily's heartbreaking sidewalk plea suddenly crystallized in Elias's mind with chilling clarity. It wasn't an act of desperation born solely of need, it was the next phase of a plan. Damien had engineered a situation so dire that a small child had to beg, knowing her innocence would be a powerful tool. The money she brought in was just a secondary gain. The primary objective was to deepen their dependency, to seal them off from the world completely, making them utterly reliant on the one person who controlled the source of their misery. The monster in this story wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was delivering it in a black duffel bag. The theory was monstrous, almost too cruel to be believable, but Elias knew they needed proof. Rosa managed to get a crucial break. During one of Damien's brief visits, she gained access to the apartment's trash, retrieving one of the empty prescription bottles. She also took a discreet sample from the air purifier's filter. The results from a private lab, which came back in a stark clinical report, confirmed their worst fears. The residue in the bottle was not clonazepam. It was a complex, synthetic substance,
Such a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for
slow-acting poison
coming.
designed to
We had a
induce chronic
marvelous
fatigue,
time.
muscle
Good night.
weakness, and cognitive fog. The symptoms matched Anya's condition perfectly. Furthermore, the air filter contained trace amounts of the same toxin, indicating Damien was aerosolizing it, ensuring a constant, low-level exposure that would keep her perpetually debilitated. This was the chilling reality. Damien Croft was a gardener, and his garden was human suffering. He had carefully planted the seeds of illness in Anya, nurtured them with his treatments, and was now preparing to harvest the sympathy of strangers through her child. The scheme was a twisted form of Munchausen by proxy, a factitious disorder imposed on another, but weaponized for financial and psychological control. The pieces of the puzzle now formed a complete and horrifying picture. Damien had likely targeted Anya after discovering she had some modest savings, perhaps from an inheritance or a small lottery win, which he had quickly siphoned away. Once the money was gone, he transitioned to this more insidious plan. By making her sick, he created a problem only he could seemingly manage. He was the sole architect of her prison and the only one who held the key, a role that gave him absolute power. Lily's plea to work for her mom was the final masterful stroke. It was a performance designed to be utterly convincing because it was real. The child's fear and desperation were genuine, making her the perfect, unwitting pawn. The money she earned was insignificant compared to the ultimate goal, to solidify their complete isolation and dependency. With Anya bedridden and Lily acting as a public beggar, they were trapped in a cycle entirely of his making. Any potential help from outsiders would be filtered through him,
What
the
Elias,
devoted
an
friend.
elderly African
He was
American
not just
private
poisoning
investigator,
Anya's body,
found was a
he was
paradox.
systematically dismantling their will, ensuring they would never have the strength or the clarity to escape. The cardboard sign was not a cry for help. It was a tool of their captivity, and understanding this truth filled Elias with a cold, focused rage. The time for observation was over. The information from the lab transformed the situation from a disturbing mystery into a life-or-death emergency. Elias and Rosa immediately went to the police, presenting their meticulously gathered evidence. Initially skeptical of a millionaire's
The
involvement
analysis
in a
confirms
seemingly
it's a
mundane
potent
welfare case,
toxin.
the detectives were quickly
We have
convinced
a
by the forensic
situation,
report
Elias.
and Rosa's
The
detailed
entire
surveillance.
batch is
A plan was
compromised.
hastily formed.
Drop the weapon
Damien's
now.
next
Get
visit
on the
was
ground.
scheduled for the
Stay
following
back.
evening. The police would wait for him to enter the apartment and move in once he was engaged in his poisonous treatment, hoping to catch him in the act. The hours ticked by with agonizing slowness. Elias waited in a nondescript van with Rosa and a police lieutenant, watching the apartment building through a long-range camera. The tension was a physical presence in the cramped space. They saw Damien arrive, right on schedule, the black duffel bag in his hand. He performed his usual ritual of scanning the street before disappearing inside. After 10 minutes, the police team moved. The silence of the evening was shattered by the sound of the apartment door being forced open. The scene that greeted them was more chilling than anyone had anticipated. Anya was on the sofa, but she was now connected to a small, portable foredrip that hadn't been there before. Damien was leaning over her, a syringe in his hand, poised to inject a clear liquid into the foreline. He froze, his face a mask of shock that quickly twisted into fury. He was wrestled to the ground and disarmed. The syringe was secured as evidence. Paramedics, who had been staged
Yes,
nearby,
I love the
rushed in and
fountains.
gently disconnected Anya from the floor. She was barely conscious, her eyes fluttering with a confused terror. As she was carefully lifted onto a gurney, one of the paramedics examined the forebag and the syringe, confirming to the lead detective that the substance was likely a concentrated dose of the same toxin, a dose that could have been fatal. Damien hadn't just been maintaining her illness. He had been preparing to end her life, likely because Elias's involvement had threatened his control. Lily, who had been hiding in her room, was brought out and comforted by a female officer. The immediate danger was over, but the psychological damage inflicted on the small girl, who had just witnessed her only source of help, being arrested for trying to kill her mother, was immeasurable.
Police!
In that chaotic, heart-wrenching moment,
move!
the full, monstrous scope of Damien's cruelty was laid bare. In the quiet aftermath of the storm, the full, chilling truth was laid bare. Damien Croft, under the intense pressure of interrogation, saw his carefully constructed world crumble and confessed to everything. His scheme was even more coldly calculated than anyone had guessed. He had indeed targeted Anya after learning she had received a significant, but not life-changing inheritance from a deceased relative. He had charmed his way into her life, isolated her from her few contacts, and systematically drained her bank accounts. When the money was gone, his true project began. He transitioned from a thief to a puppeteer, orchestrating Anya's physical decline to create a perpetual crisis that only he could manage. The expensive medical items were props, designed to sell the illusion of his benevolent care. Lily's sidewalk begging was the final evolution of his plan, a way to monetize their misery while ensuring they remained too visible in their desperation to quietly disappear, thus cementing his role as their indispensable guardian. His attempt to administer a lethal dose was his panic button. Elias's persistent involvement had become a variable he could not control, and so Anya had become a liability to be permanently silenced. For Elias Vance, the resolution was profoundly transformative. The man who had entered this story out of a fleeting sense of pity now found himself grappling with a different kind of responsibility. The legal system would deal with Damien, but the devastation he left in his wake required a different kind of justice. Elias ensured Anya received the best medical care available. Freed from the constant, low-grade poisoning, her recovery was slow but remarkable. The color returned to her cheeks, the fog lifted from her eyes, and she began the long, painful process of rebuilding a life stolen from her. For Lily, Elias did more than just provide financial security. He used his influence and resources to establish a trust fund that would guarantee her education and future, ensuring the shadow of Damien would never darken her path again. But his actions extended beyond the 2 lives he had directly saved. Haunted by the sophistication of the cruelty he had witnessed, Elias dedicated a portion of his fortune to founding a non-profit aimed at identifying and assisting victims of similar non-violent, psychological exploitation, crimes that often left no visible bruises but shattered lives just the same. The little girl with the cardboard sign had, in the end, given the millionaire a purpose far more valuable than any business deal. He had set out to solve a puzzle and in doing so, had rediscovered his own humanity, a fortune whose value no amount of money could ever measure.